The first thing Patricia Walters said to me was, "Do you even know how to eat steak properly?" Her tone was polished venom. "The kind that comes wrapped in pearls and privilege." I smiled, adjusted my cardigan, and let her think she'd landed the insult of the evening. If she'd known I could buy the entire restaurant with the interest from my investment account, she might have chosen different words. "My name is Monica Reeves. I'm 62 years old. A retired CEO who now teaches part-time online because I enjoy staying sharp." But that night, standing under the golden chandeliers of Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse, everyone thought I was just a modest Spanish teacher from Florida. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Across the table, my son Daniel straightened his tie for the 5th time in 5 minutes. At 35, he's a corporate attorney, brilliant, kind, and too pure for the social predators circling him tonight. Beside him sat Brianna Walters, his girlfriend of 2 years. She's an influencer, the kind of beauty that photographs well with champagne glasses and designer handbags. She hadn't looked up from her phone once since we arrived. Patricia, her mother, radiated money and disdain in equal measure. Every diamond on her wrist seemed to sparkle with judgment. Her husband, Robert Walters, carried himself like a man used to owning every room he entered, though I suspected he owned far less than he claimed. Together, they regarded me the way collectors examine a knockoff handbag, politely curious, but mostly disappointed. Daniel thought this dinner was about love and family. He was planning to propose tonight. But as I watched Patricia's thin smile and Brianna's glassy indifference, I realized this wasn't a family introduction, it was an audition. They weren't meeting me. They were measuring me. The thing about people like the Walters is they never question what's beneath the surface until it's too late. And that night, as the waiter poured wine and Patricia whispered something smug to her husband, I already knew. They were about to learn that the woman in the Walmart cardigan wasn't prey. She was the storm they'd invited to dinner. The waiter led us through a maze of crystal chandeliers and marble floors until we reached a round table by the window. The kind of table chosen for visibility, not comfort. Patricia smiled at the hostess as though she'd personally built the place, then turned to me with a gleam that said the evening was about to become her sport. I took my seat, folded the napkin neatly on my lap, and prepared for what I knew would be a performance. Patricia began with small talk, so sharp it could draw blood. She asked about my little online classes, her voice sweet, but her eyes calculating. When I told her I taught Spanish to adults who wanted to travel, she tilted her head like I'd confessed to a hobby rather than a career. Robert chuckled softly and added that working online must be convenient for someone on a fixed income. Brianna barely looked up from her phone, scrolling as if she were somewhere far more important. When she finally spoke, it was to say, "Daniel, you should have told your mom to wear something formal. That cardigan doesn't really fit the restaurant vibe." The comment landed like a slap across the table. My son's face turned red, torn between defending me and maintaining peace. I spared him the struggle with a calm smile. 30 years in boardrooms had given me thicker skin than they could imagine. Robert lifted his glass and started discussing the importance of aligning family values. He spoke as if marriage were a merger and my son was a promising acquisition. Patricia nodded in agreement, eyes never leaving my modest jewelry. I recognized the look she was calculating, the dollar value of every item I wore. When she finally asked whether I'd ever been to a place this refined, I told her, truthfully, that it was beautiful. That seemed to disappoint her. The waiter poured the wine. Patricia leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough for me to hear. "We're longtime members here. The wine list alone is worth the fee." She paused delicately before adding, "Though I suppose you don't drink often." I smiled, thinking of the vineyard in Tuscany, where I'd once shared a bottle worth more than her handbag. Some truths are best left unsaid. Daniel thought this dinner would bring two families together. He didn't realize it was setting the stage for a reckoning. As I watched Patricia sip her wine and whisper something smug to Robert, I knew exactly how this night would end. Not with a toast, but with a lesson they'd never forget. Halfway through the appetizers, a ripple of surprise passed through the dining room. A tall man in a crisp white chef's coat was striding toward our table, his face breaking into a broad smile. For a moment, Patricia looked confused, clearly expecting his attention to be for her. Then he stopped right beside me. "Mrs. Reeves," he said warmly, voice full of genuine delight. "I can't believe it's really you." His words carried just enough volume to draw nearby glances. Robert's fork froze midair, and Patricia's painted smile faltered. Brianna even set her phone down. The chef clasped my hand and went on, explaining how my company had once saved his restaurant after a devastating kitchen fire 2 years earlier. He told the story like a man describing a miracle, recounting how my firm, Reeves Insurance, had stepped in when every other company refused to cover the losses. "You didn't just cut a check," he said. "You made sure we could rebuild." He signaled to a waiter, who returned with a bottle of champagne presented like a royal offering. "From our private reserve," the chef said, placing it beside me. "Krug 1996 for the woman who saved our future." The words landed like thunder. Patricia blinked rapidly, and Robert cleared his throat, as if choking on his own importance. Daniel looked at me, astonished. "Mom, I didn't know you." I gave a small smile and cut him off gently. Old projects have a way of finding me again. Across the table, Brianna's eyes darted between her parents, trying to read their faces. For the first time all evening, silence reigned. The waiter filled our glasses. The champagne sparkled under the chandelier, casting gold reflections across the tablecloth. Patricia raised hers mechanically, her hand trembling slightly. I toasted quietly, savoring the moment, not out of pride, but because I'd seen this kind of reversal before. The powerful love to underestimate until the curtain lifts. As the chef disappeared back to his kitchen, I could feel every pair of eyes on me. The woman they'd dismissed as ordinary had just become the most interesting person in the room, and the night had only begun. Dinner had grown quieter after the chef's surprise visit, but the tension at our table thickened like honey left too long in the jar. Patricia tried to recover her composure, adjusting her diamond bracelet as if its sparkle could distract from her embarrassment. Robert cleared his throat and forced a laugh that didn't quite land. Brianna, ever the actress, smiled tightly at Daniel and slipped her hand over his wrist, her voice turning sugary sweet. She began talking about wedding plans as if the earlier awkwardness had never happened. 200,000 should cover everything, she said lightly, her eyes darting toward her mother for approval. Patricia nodded without hesitation, adding that a proper venue worthy of our families would cost even more. Robert leaned back in his chair, puffing his chest. "Of course, we wouldn't expect your mother to contribute much," he said, smiling at me. "We understand her situation." Daniel froze, his fork halfway to his plate. I could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes: shock, shame, and a growing realization of who these people really were. He glanced at me, searching for a reaction. I gave him none. I'd spent a lifetime learning that silence can cut deeper than words. Patricia continued, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "It's so important for families to know their roles. You know, everyone contributing in ways they can." The insult was disguised as grace, but I recognized a blade when I saw one. Daniel's jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, his voice had steel in it. "Mom has never needed help from anyone," he said. His words landed like a challenge. Brianna's hand slipped from his bauda. Her face stiffened. Then she forced a laugh. "Relax. Babe. It's just dinner." But Daniel wasn't smiling anymore. He reached into his jacket, fingers brushing the small velvet box he'd been carrying all week. Then he pulled his hand back slowly. "I think I need to give this more thought," he said quietly. The color drained from Brianna's face. Patricia's lips parted in disbelief. He sat still, my pulse steady, knowing the evening had finally revealed what I came here to see. Some people think love is blind. I prefer to think it just needs the right lighting. 2 days after that dinner, I received an email from an unfamiliar name, a stylist who had worked with Brianna on several brand campaigns. Her message was polite but pointed. She thought I deserved to know that Brianna's lifestyle wasn't entirely funded by sponsorship deals. According to her, one particular investor, a married venture capitalist, had been financing Brianna's travel and designer wardrobe for over a year. Attached to the email were receipts, flight records, and a few blurred photos that left little room for interpretation. Every work trip to the Bahamas or Milan had been charged to a corporate card belonging to that man's firm. I read it twice, feeling neither shock nor anger, only clarity. People like Brianna always revealed themselves, eventually. Some just needed the right mirror. Later that week, Patricia invited me for tea, perhaps hoping to smooth the tension left after the ruined engagement. I accepted, arriving calm, with every piece of evidence neatly stored away in my mind. When she began talking about her daughter's innocent heart, I simply smiled and said, "She seems comfortable around men who like to invest in her image." The teacup froze in her hand. Brianna looked down, color draining from her face. I didn't press further. Not yet. Sometimes, the most effective strike is the one you let them see coming. The flowers arrived first, 3 dozen white roses arranged with military precision. The card read, "Let's start fresh. Love. Patricia Walters." I knew a peace offering when I saw one. But I also knew that Patricia didn't believe in peace unless she had the upper hand. The next morning, she proved it. She appeared at my Sarasota apartment unannounced, dressed in a pale suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her smile was wide but brittle, the kind that hides a knife behind the teeth. I invited her in out of courtesy, not warmth. She settled on my sofa, eyes darting around the room, quietly assessing what everything was worth. We made small talk over coffee until her tone shifted, her voice dropping to something lower, sharper. She said Robert had connections, people who could influence decisions at Morrison Energy, where Daniel worked. She didn't bother to disguise the message. If I didn't convince my son to reconcile with Brianna, those connections could make his career disappear. The words landed softly, but carried the weight of a loaded weapon. I kept my expression neutral, though I could feel my heartbeat steady and cold. I'd faced power plays before, but this was different. This was personal. Patricia leaned forward, her perfume heavy in the air, and said it was unfortunate when a young lawyer's reputation becomes complicated. She smiled as though she were doing me a favor. When she finally left, the scent of her perfume lingered like smoke after a fire. I stood at the window, watching the Gulf waves roll in slow and steady, and let the reality sink in. Patricia Walters had declared war not just on me, but on my son, and in her arrogance, she'd made the same mistake every bully makes. She assumed the quiet woman in the cardigan didn't know how to fight back. She was about to learn. I'd spent my entire career teaching people exactly how to win battles they never saw coming. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee, watching lightning flash far out over the Gulf. Patricia had threatened my son's future as if she were talking about canceling a dinner reservation. But she'd made one fatal mistake. She underestimated how far a mother would go to protect her child. The next morning, I called an old friend, Marcus Dean, who now ran one of the largest commercial brokerage firms on the East Coast. Marcus had been my partner back when we built Thompson and Dean Insurance from the ground up. Long before I sold my share, he'd seen me negotiate with billionaires and walk away smiling. When I told him someone had threatened Daniel's career, his tone shifted instantly. He didn't ask who. They always know it's personal when I call. Within 48 hours, Marcus sent me a confidential report on the Walters family finances. It was worse than I expected. Robert Walters wasn't a titan of industry. He was drowning in debt. His firm was running what amounted to a shell game, using new investor money to cover old losses. Their largest client was his father-in-law's construction company, which had already flagged him for questionable accounting practices. I didn't need to invent leverage. He'd handed it to me wrapped in red ink. So when Robert called later that week, pretending the previous threats had never happened, I was ready. He wanted to move forward and discuss a plan for Brianna's personal development, an 18-month program of travel and growth experiences. The cost $400,000. I told him I'd be happy to fund the entire thing, on one small condition. Before sending any money, I'd need a complete financial disclosure and background check on his company. Standard procedure, I said. He went silent for a long moment, then mumbled something about calling back. After the call, I sat back and smiled. They thought they'd found an easy mark, a sentimental mother with more money than sense. But I was done playing defense. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. And Patricia and Robert were about to discover that the woman they'd tried to intimidate was the same one who used to audit Fortune 500 seconds before breakfast. They wanted to play business. Perfect. Because I'd just turned their con into a contract they couldn't afford to sign. The Walters arrived at my Sarasota apartment on a humid Saturday evening, their confidence already beginning to crack. Patricia wore a silk dress in a desperate shade of optimism, and Robert clutched a leather briefcase like a life raft. Brianna lingered behind them, quieter than usual, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I greeted them warmly, the perfect hostess preparing for her final act. The table was set for 5. Though only 4 of us would be eating, I'd invited Marcus to join as my financial advisor, a title that made Robert visibly pale. The man who once bragged about knowing everyone worth knowing now looked like a schoolboy summoned to the principal's office. I poured wine, smiled politely, and waited for the tension to ripen. We began with pleasantries, but the air was thick with unspoken dread. When Robert tried to steer the conversation toward their educational investment proposal, I stopped him with a single word: excellent. I told him I'd reviewed the preliminary financials he'd sent that morning and had a few questions before finalizing the transfer. The color drained from his face. Patricia's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Marcus opened his folder, his tone crisp and surgical. He asked about discrepancies in their company's ledgers, the outstanding bank loans, and a pending inquiry from the state's financial regulator. With each question, Robert wilted further, his voice shrinking until it was barely a whisper. Patricia tried to intervene, but every number Marcus cited came directly from public records. I'd made sure of that. When the silence grew unbearable, I spoke. I told them I had no intention of funding Brianna's transformation, nor would I tolerate further threats against my son. Their empire, I said gently, had been built on sand, and I just turned the tide. Robert's briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Brianna looked at her parents, as if seeing them for the first time. Patricia finally spoke, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You planned this." I met her gaze and smiled, calm and steady. "No, Patricia, you planned this. I just finished it for you." She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. But Robert didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the numbers that had finally exposed him. When they left, the night air felt lighter. Justice doesn't always come from courts or lawyers. It comes from knowing the truth and daring to show it at the right table. After the Walters left, I stood at the window, watching their car disappear down the palm-lined road. The air outside was heavy with summer rain. But inside, everything felt clean again. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without that tightness in my chest. Justice, I realized, didn't always roar it sometimes, whispered. Steady and unshakable. Daniel called later that night, his voice lighter than I'd heard in months. He'd heard from a colleague that Robert Walters was under quiet financial review, and the firm's so-called connections had suddenly gone silent. I told him it was amazing how fast reputations crumble when built on bluff and borrowed money. He laughed softly, then said he was proud of me. I told him the truth. I wasn't fighting for pride. I was fighting for him to see that real power doesn't shout, it acts with precision. In the days that followed, I returned to my quiet beach routine. Mornings with coffee and the sound of waves. Afternoons teaching Spanish online to people who valued learning more than appearances. Every so often, I'd think about Patricia's stunned face across that dinner table the moment she realized she'd tried to manipulate the wrong woman. Power, I've learned, isn't measured by how much you own or who fears you. It's measured by who can't shake your calm when they try to break you. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it struck a chord or reminded you of your own battles, share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories of justice, strength, and redemption. Until next time, take care of your peace.